Hello learners, this is Development of Agriculture and Society, Lecture 1 for Module 2 of Intro to Agricultural Science. So to start off, 250 years ago in the world or industry, or just America in general, was much different. 95% of the U.S. population farmed directly, and each farmer was only responsible for clothing and feeding 3 other people in the world. Most of the work was done by hand. Some people had animal power, such as horses, and most everything was used on the barter system, which is a system where you had your own goods and services and you traded them for other goods or services that you needed and didn't produce yourself. Most families were self-sufficient, and they produced their own needs, whether that was tobacco, sugarcane, rice, and cotton, their own clothing, their own soaps and candles, medicine, shoes, and farming implements. 250 years ago was a very rural time, and so there weren't very many city centers, and that's why 95% of the people were able to produce their own goods, and there wasn't much of city centers to buy things, and that's why they had the barter system. So 250 years ago, the largest probably significant event was in 1793 when Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin. And the cotton gin was a machine that removed the seeds from cotton rather than doing it by hand. And cotton was used in the U.S. and exported at the time as well. So 200 years ago, we've reduced a little bit of the population still farming. So 92% of the U.S. population was farming. And every farmer produced enough agricultural products to feed and clothe 4 other people. So it's going up. 250 years ago was 3, and now we're at 4. So at this time, families are becoming less self-sufficient, and so they use the barter system, and that was usually to trade soaps and candles, medicine, and shoes that they weren't creating on their own and needed to have. Some significant events from 200 years ago was that Cyrus McCormick developed the mechanical reaper, and what it was to harvest wheat. In the past, they had sickles, which were like long, they look like grim reapers, and hence the mechanical reaper. That's where that comes from. And so they were doing it by hand, and this machine mechanically did it. So it reduced labor, reduced time, and in turn, you could harvest more and profit more. After that, in 1837, John Deere began manufacturing plows. And this could be either hooked up to a horse, which is probably the most efficient, or it could be done by hand, and allowed fertile ground to be plowed under and cultivated. So 150 years ago, 90% of the population was farming, and each farmer produced enough for 5 other people. So in 1855, Michigan and Pennsylvania established the first state agricultural college. And there was a senator named Justin Morrill from Vermont, and he produced this bill that would provide funds to establish schools to teach practical methods of producing food and fiber. And they also had other mechanical trade and mechanical arts within these agricultural colleges. At these ag colleges, they would also be conducting scientific research, where they would find knowledge and would develop new ways of agricultural and mechanical arts. Also, in 1862, President Lincoln developed the first Department of Agriculture, what we know today as the USDA, and they called this the People's Department because there was a large majority of our population still in farming. Followed in the same year, the Morrill Act was passed by that Senator Justin Morrill to provide each state with their own land to create a college for common people, and this was to teach agricultural and mechanical arts. And so he introduced the bill earlier, but in 1862 was when that Morrill Act passed. In addition, in 1869, the Transcontinental Railroad was completed, and this really opened the markets for farmers or just businessmen to transport their goods anywhere across the United States. 1875, the first grain silos were built, and then in 1881, hybrid corn was produced, which introduced more varieties. And then in 1887, Congress passed the Hatch Act. And the Hatch Act established experiment stations of what we know today is connected to our land-grant universities and the Cooperative Extension Service. And so this allowed land-grant colleges to experiment and do research formally to produce better varieties, better land management practices. So now that we've introduced hybrids, I want you to move forward with the next link and watch the Smithsonian video called Past, Present, and Future of Agriculture. And there's an article below it that you can read. So my question to you is, what are the benefits and trade-offs of using technology to alter our food supply? I want you to answer your own question with your own post and then respond to others' ideas, agree or disagree, and you can also play devil's advocate.